Hello and welcome back to Business Matters at the Hindu with me, K. Bharat Kumar. Quiet quitting has captured popular imagination in recent days. Is there something to it, or is it just a new name for something that's as old as industry itself? Quiet quitters are described as people who just come in to their workplace, do their job, and no more. American analytics and advisory company Gallup, in a blog post earlier this month, referred to its own survey that showed that 50% of American workers are quiet quitters, and that percentage could well be more. It also showed that engagement levels of companies with their employees is also dropping. Experts that we spoke to back in India tell us that quiet quitters are not those who shirk work. They meet expectations, which is fine. There are others that say that the level of engagement an employee shows towards his organization should be seen as distinct from the number of hours he or she puts in, and that a quiet quitter could be actually contributing significantly more than others, even if he works a certain sane number of hours. That's on the one side. At the other end of the spectrum, you have CEOs like Alibaba's Jack Ma with his 996 formula. He says you have to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. Sounds like a maze, right? Let's dive right in. E. Balaji, Global CHRO at TVS Supply Chain Solutions, says that in HR, new fads like these keep popping up. And he says there's nothing new has been around for a while. He says whether or not companies currently use what is informally referred to as the bell curve system of performance appraisal, you'll always have a solid 70% chunk in the middle of a performance graph. These are neither rock stars nor those who perform below par. The bell curve system of performance appraisal was something that GE pioneered, and GE itself abandoned it in 2015. The way this works is a team, and any team, it could be small teams or a company at large, the performance of team members is plotted on a graph, and you typically have 10 to 15% rockstar high performers at one end, and then those who perform below par at the other end, forming about 10 to 15%, and about 70 to 80% who are solid right in the middle of the graph, contributing to a company's success. Balaji says he'd like to make a distinction between quiet quitters and those who are actively engaged in the company. He says a good chunk of that 70% population in that bell curve that we talked about would actually be people who form what he calls solid citizens, or the backbone of a company. He says a very small part of that population could be quiet quitters who just come in, clock in, and go back home. Barnik Maitra, who heads the India practice for Arthur D. Little, said to be the oldest management consulting firm, says that we have to look at output distinctly from input. He says somebody could just walk in, work the average 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, but still be able to contribute significantly to a company's progress. In which case, the company has a chance to look at these individuals and engage more with them and see if they can be brought up to the rockstar levels. He says that the system has what he calls coasters, when people just coast along with the company. The system has such coasters, they tend to exit the company over a period of time because nobody would continue in a position if their careers are stagnating. When it comes to definitions and descriptions, one size may not fit all. The nature of work is as important when you're trying to determine engagement levels and performances. Mr. Rostov Ravanan, who co-founded the software services firm Mindtree and who is now chairman and CEO of cybersecurity firm Alpha Hive, says that typically in a software services company, and we take software because it relies a lot more on humans than machinery. So he says in a typical mid-sized software services company, about 2 to 5% of projects are super critical, where you need really rock stars, high-class, A-class performers. Then you have 25% of projects that are truly mundane and boring, but that's also a cash cow. You're doing something for clients and they give you money for it. And then in the middle, you have that solid chunk, much like humans' performances. You also have projects right in the middle. He says it's also important to see how team compositions work, because you cannot have all A-class players in one team, then the team becomes dysfunctional. And this description also applies to career paths. If you look at somebody in sales versus somebody in accounts receivables, for instance, in sales, you will necessarily have to be an extrovert. You'll have to make those extra phone calls to help meet your targets, take a few knocks on the head, go out and meet people, and so on and so forth. You cannot afford to be a quiet quitter. Whereas a person in the accounts department need not work, past 6 p.m. most days, unless, it's the end of a period, like a quarter or a year. But the person in accounts receivables does as important a job as a salesperson. So Ravan argues that such people, for example in accounts, tend to have long careers in companies. If cricket player Virender Sehwag hits a 300 against Pakistan, that's a great thing, right? But does that become the benchmark score for his subsequent performances? If he hits a 120 in the next match, it's still a century, very good. But can you say that he's actually underperforming because it's not as good as his 300 earlier? That's not how it works, right? Likewise in corporate, take the example of sales. If your average per quarter is you bring in 5 new clients to your company's client list, and then one quarter you hit 10 new clients, whatever reasons, you worked hard, clients have been responsive, demand has gone up, and then in the subsequent quarter you fall to 6. 6 is actually better than your average of 5. But have you underperformed just because in the previous quarter you had 10? No. Maitra says that when he advises clients, he asks these employers to look at people profiles, not in terms of quarters or even 1 year, but as a set of 4 to 5 years in which people move from level A to level B. He says both the performance appraisal system and the humans using them should recognize that there are individuals who could be high performers at one point in time, but go through some bad times. They may have a couple of bad quarters or even a couple of bad years. He says some companies are still struggling to introduce this nuance into their appraisal systems. And he says it all depends on the maturity of the company. Balaji of TVS Supply Chain Solutions says that in some years, one could be a quiet quitter, say for 3-4 years, and then suddenly you could hit the accelerate button. He says if a career spans about 30 to 40 years, it must be seen as running a marathon. There will be periods when you have to accelerate, show a lot of zest and energy. Then there will be periods when you will slow down and show some balance. It happens to all of us in a work week. Monday or Tuesday, you storm into the office and show a lot of zest and energy. But Wednesday, Thursday, you may not need to or want to, and you'll wind up by 5 p.m. That doesn't mean that this person is a quiet quitter. Even in startups, you do need some crests and troughs. In a startup culture, if everybody is working 100 hours a week, then everybody is burning out, says Maitra of Atari Little. He says that in some startups, it is likely that 10 to 15% of all their activity is actually wasteful, and they would be well served if they can introspect and look at such activity and cut it out of the system. To understand how engaged employees are, what questions should employers be asking these employees at the time of appraisals? The experts that we quoted earlier in this conversation shared with us a few questions that could help here. What really drives excitement for you at work? What can your employer do more of to get you more excited about waking up in the morning and showing up at work? Are there things at work that drain your energy, make you feel disengaged? Do you have a good understanding of what is required from you? And do you have all the resources including physical, skills, data, and information flow that you need to deliver? Are you aware of the organization's goal and how your output fits in within that context? What happens to the organization if you do a good job or a bad job? Are you happy with the team that you work with closely now currently? Here is a role that is a few rungs up your career ladder. By doing these 1, 2, 3 things, you can reach this level. Would you be interested? If not, what role are you looking at and how can the company help you get there? Before we wind down this discussion, I'll leave you with a couple of divergent thoughts. If you as an employee say, last year the company grew 20%, so what if we don't grow this year, right? But would you be willing to accept increments that aren't as high as at least inflation rates? As Ravanan of Alpha Hive points out, that any company is a living organism, and any living organism needs growth. Without growth, it atrophies, and growth does not come without pain. The other point I wanted to leave you with is we spoke to a very small software services company. The founder did not want to come on record, but he says we are missing out big time on celebrating those that are meeting expectations. Meeting expectations is actually a big deal. I wonder what your thoughts are on these two counts. Leave your comments below. Till the next episode of Business Matters, it's goodbye from us. Have a lovely week ahead.